welcome to another Glyndwr Live TV session. Tonight we've got a very special session for you. It's going to be a little bit different from the ones we normally have. Normally we have a band on for you who play a session of all the latest tracks. Tonight we've got a very different session because we're going behind the instruments, in fact behind the amplifiers. And tonight we're going to be talking to a very special engineer and designer and proprietor of an amplifier company called DWJ, and his name's Dan Whitelock-Jones. So hello Dan and welcome to Wrexham.
Thanks for having me.
So, amplifiers, what's your background? Where did you start getting into all of this sort of stuff?
I started in product design, very different, in a very different field.
Okay, what field was that?
I went off and worked in retail.
Okay.
And electronics was more a hobby than anything else. That's progressed slowly into something that was much larger. I only ever seen it as a hobby.
Okay.
Until I left retail, and I took it from there, really.
So what type of retail? What did you, was it electronics retail? Was it musical instruments?
No, I dressed windows.
Dressed windows?
I dressed windows, and then I went on to basically work in management and sell clothing.
Right. Okay, so that's totally different field.
It paid the bills.
It paid the bills.
At the time, I couldn't earn the money doing electronics, so I just took myself off. And
so this transition from dressing windows to electronics, did you have any sort of training on the way, or did you have any sort of career sort of milestones in that sort of area?
No, not really. Not really.
How can you go from window dressing to that sort of level of electronics?
I think if you really love doing something, it's something that you do.
Right.
Yeah, I don't, I'd come home, tinker with circuits, build power supplies. You know, if the bell broke on the front door, I'd go and build a new thing. Or if something in the car didn't work properly, I'd rip it apart and start tinkering with it. And yeah.
What sort of age were you when you started doing that? Then you say you fixed the doorbell at home and things like that. Do you think you've been constantly into tinkering with electronics? Would that be
definitely. I was the kid that took everything apart, but I could put it back together again.
Right. I was the other kid. I was the one who took it all apart and then couldn't put it back together. That's another story.
Yeah.
So, the business then, your amplifier business. I first come into contact with your amplifiers when I was doing a recording session, and I was recording that amplifier over there, that green amplifier, and when Steve walked in the door with it, I thought, what the hell is this? What is this amplifier all about?
Sure.
So how long ago was it that you started doing these, and why have you took such a, the look of that amplifier alone, has that got something to do with your background with, design and things like that?
Interestingly, no. I was made redundant from a position, and the wife said, you can have a couple of years off, look after the kids, and within the first kind of month I got really bored.
Right.
So I had some little designs for some pedals, and the idea was I'd make a few little units, sell them off, small little business, but just something to kind of, sort of tick me over. And a gent said, come a guitar show. Went a guitar show, sold a couple more pedals, and sort of realised that the equipment I was using to sell the pedals is what people were really interested in, especially the amplifiers. I had Vox, I had Fender, I had Marshall amplifiers, and people were more interested in buying the amplifier from me than buying the box.
Right.
So the equation was, if I cut out the amplifier and I build my own amplifier, that they didn't have an excuse to not buy the pedal. Right. They wanted the amplifier still, and the pedal was kind of surplus to requirements, and all of a sudden people said, well, will you build me one? And one turned into two, turned into three, turned into four, turned into a kind of a small business, and it's just escalated from there, really.
So you went from the solid state sort of designs in the pedals to valves. Was there a conscious decision to go down the valve route?
Yes, I just think valves sound infinitely better.
Okay. Well, we're going to explore that a little bit more later. So you get made redundant, you start making amplifiers, and you start selling the amplifiers at trade fairs and things like that. So what sort of scale are you working at now with amplifier design? Do you have a client list or do you market and go to a wider sort of field?
I'm trying to do both.
Okay.
I've been working with companies. I work with Patrick Eggle at the moment. We're designing an amplifier for him. Okay. There are other people who are coming on board slowly but surely that want bits of kit designing. I really want to push my own amplifier range because it's something that is quite unique and quite different to what's been around. I was sort of almost off-put by what was about. You know, you open these things up and you realise that it's incredibly cheap and it's sold for, you know, exorbitant amounts of money. The markup is ridiculous, and I thought, well, within that, as long as I always kept it quite small, that I could put some real quality into it and shape things for people. You know.
So your drive is quality as opposed to mass market and cost?
Most definitely, yeah. It's all about taking it back to a point where design and amplifiers really changed. The mass market decided that they were going to copy a said typography of amplifier, whereas I wanted to slightly take it in a different direction.
Okay.
Go backwards to more hi-fi, to more British sort of big solid construction. Okay. You know, put real materials in there and not just bits of plastic and you know, bits of cardboard to hold the thing together.
Something I noticed on your website, and something that Steve actually mentioned to me when he brought the amplifier, and he described the amplifier as a boutique amplifier. And I'd never come across that phrase before. Sure. How would you explain that? What is a boutique amplifier?
Well, boutique just means small shop.
Okay.
And you can't get any smaller than myself in my tiny little workshop, sort of producing these things. But I don't like the ethos around what many people believe a boutique amplifier to be. It's something that's niche and not very acceptable. Yeah, it's quite hard, or should I say, you need a lot of money to buy into it.
Right.
Yeah, and it's quite hard to hear a lot of these things without buying into it.
Right.
So it's not very accessible.
Okay.
And I wanted to make it very accessible and allow people to come and to try and have their say in what they feel an amplifier should sound like.
I've noticed on your Facebook that lots of the musicians who've been buying your products constantly post on your Facebook, and in fact you mentioned you were coming here today, and I've seen all the posts of people saying they'd like to be here and they'd like to come and see, you know, how you talk about it.
If you're going to sell something to somebody, they have to be a part of it.
Right.
It's not for me to sort of make a big bold brash statement and say this is the thing. Well, you probably got a completely different idea of what the thing is. Yeah. So to bring people in and to allow them their little say and to allow the product to be shaped, which comes full circle to what you were saying about the green amplifier. Yeah. That's what that guitarist wanted. Right. He wanted a green amplifier. Well, he can have whatever he wants. It's not going to cost him any. Yes, it is a bit different.
Different from buying a Marshall.
Yes, but it's not going to cost him any more.
Yeah.
And I think that's the problem within the boutique market, is that people are very quick to charge even more for something that is even more niche because that one customer wants it. When I'm making very small runs of things and it can be changed very quickly, and the customer is then happy with what he's actually got, you know?
Yeah, yeah. So
that's a long-winded way of putting it.
No, it's a very good answer. Right, we're going to move on, and our house band are going to play another number for us now. And what we're intending to do tonight is we're going to be alternating between the two leads. To introduce them, I feel very, very, very rude now. On bass, we've got Andy Whitfield. On guitar, the first guitar there, we've got Steve Kenyon. On the drums, we've got Steff. And on this guitar here, we've got Steve Nicholls. So go and take it away, guys. Green Onions. So Dan, in the first part of our discussion, we talked a little bit about your background and how you got into electronics and the whole sort of ethos of how you started and the company started. I'd like to delve a little bit deeper into the electronic side now and talk a little bit more about the technology. The first question is, in terms of amplifiers, people talk about the sound of an amplifier, the trademark sound, like a Fender Twin or a Marshall Stack or whatever. What do you think your sound is? What do you think your aim is with the amplifiers you produce?
I try to build things that have incredibly short signal paths.
Right.
Yeah. It's core to getting a real touch-sensitive. I almost see an amplifier like an instrument.
Okay.
Yeah, it has to react, it has to have feel. No two people have that same feel, yet when they play one of my amplifiers, they always seem to, they instinctively know it's them playing, and that is really important. So I talked before about how I maybe went away from what the norm was within the marketplace. And I look at hi-fi as being the mainstay of good design within audio equipment. Most guitar amplifiers are actually designed very badly.
Right.
In a good way.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, I've tried to reel that back a little bit and try and give as pure a sound from start to finish as I think is possible.
So cutting back on components, is that what you mean by shorter signal path?
In a way, yes, but it's even down to the amount of wire you have in a thing,
okay.
How the layout of each component is put within a given amplifier or a given circuit can change. It can stop things like parasitic oscillation,
okay.
things from motorboard and extraneous noise being put into the circuit because of how the thing is built.
Okay. So good design, clean design, and simple design.
Yes.
Is that what you think?
In essence, yes. With a little bit of bad design in there.
Bad design. Can you give us an example of bad design then? What would be bad design?
Distortion is bad design in hi-fi audio.
Okay.
And we like distortion as guitarists.
Okay.
So I design a distortion into the amplifier, but maybe not in the way that a lot of other designers would go about designing the distortion within the amplifier.
So good distortion and bad distortion. How would you define one against the other? Is there any way of describing it?
No.
Okay.
But you instantly know what sounds good and what sounds bad.
Okay. Talking about how things sound, I've read a lot of discussions online. I'm no expert at valves or valve technology, but I've read a lot of discussions online where people have talked about the virtues of certain valves and how putting that certain valve in an amplifier is instantly going to make it sound better, or even a microphone or any sort of, yes. electronic circuit. Where do you think you sit with that? Is there such a thing as a golden valve?
No.
No?
No. A valve is a current to voltage regulator.
Okay.
But it's how we control that given part of maybe a circuit, let's say,
okay.
that is important. So as an engineer, you know or you understand what the load line of a given stage of amplification is. And it's how you control that load line and how much electricity you allow through a certain stage within a certain part of an amplifier that can change how the thing sounds as an end result.
Okay, so old valves, new valves, is there any difference?
There is, but not for the reason that many people believe there to be. The golden valve is the Mullard valve, isn't it?
Okay.
Yeah.
That's the one I've actually heard about, so
yes.
I'll back that up with me limited knowledge.
Now, from an engineering point of view, if we talk about a rectifier valve, the JZ34 was probably, arguably, the greatest valve ever made. But it was only arguably the greatest valve ever made because of the way it was actually engineered and the care that was taken to make sure that the diodes within the envelope sat extremely straight and there was no variation or very little variation between a given amount of valves. So therefore, when you put that valve in its operating conditions, it would operate in the way that you believed it to operate. Yeah, which gives it a kudos because it gives it a reliability, and therefore it suddenly has mojo.
Right.
Mojo, I believe, to be reliability and nothing else. It's when a guitarist can pick an amplifier up, switch it on, it switches on, and it sounds exactly the same as it did the last time they switched it on, and it gives them, it eases them down, it makes them comfortable within their environment because their kit works in exactly the same way as it did previously. I believe that's where the mojo actually comes from.
Do you think that's actually easier to do now with modern components than it used to be?
No.
Do you think?
Because the tolerance within modern components is far wider.
Wow.
So if you can measure it, then yeah, of course. And that's where we get back down to the science, that everything needs to be measured.
Right.
And controlled.
Okay, coming on to science then and the way things sound. When you're developing your products, how do you go through that decision process about when you found the right balance, when something sounds right to you? Is there a process you go through? Is there?
It's not just about what sounds right to me, though.
Right.
It's about what sounds right to the people around me, to the people I entrust as well.
Okay.
You can't be everything to everybody, I understand that, but at the same time, you need a consensus of opinion. So I never truly trust myself.
Okay.
I give it to guys, they take it out, it goes on the stage, they play it, and that gives it its bigger meaning for me then. So then I replicate that within what I'm doing.
Right, so it's road testing and more or less a wide focus group of users that give you the feedback you need.
It's pointless in my little workshop, me believing I've hit the greatest thing in the world, yet the minute it gets on the stage, it's completely lost.
Yeah.
So it needs to work in all environments.
In terms of quality control, you must do tests then and things like that. So is the things that you do that are better than your ears, do you think? Do you do testing with instruments or anything like that?
I think, of course I do, in the sense of voltages and actual electricity and how much current flows through a certain part of a circuit. But when it comes to tone, there is only your ears.
Right.
There is only your ears, and you almost have to train your ear to a wider audience.
Yeah.
So I know what certain people like, and when I design certain amplifiers, I'll try and have them in mind constantly.
Right.
Yeah, it eases it down for me.
Right. The next question I was going to ask, when you're creating amplifiers that look as striking as the one that Steve's playing through over there, you know, it is down to what people perceive of the amplifier, and the look's got something to do with it.
Yes.
Do you actually do blind testing or anything like that of your products to see if people can tell the difference, or whether it is, you know, the perception based on look? And
it's an interesting one. Yeah, is the short answer.
Okay.
Because everything is custom, more or less. I'm very keen that the customer knows what he's buying. Therefore, there are no symbols on my amplifiers, other than my logo.
Yeah.
And that's part of my whole brand ethos, is that it's the guitarist's amplifier, and therefore he knows what it does. And if somebody else doesn't quite know what it is, then it doesn't actually make a difference.
Right.
In that respect, it's what he wants to convey over to people.
Okay.
Guitarists are snobs.
Yeah. I don't know. Are guitarists snobs? I don't know about that.
They'll have their piece of kit, and it'll be this lovely piece of kit from back in the day. And they set it here, there, and here, and there. And they know all the numbers of where the settings are. And if it deviates from that, then there's crisis. They don't quite understand anything out of that remit, because that's how it's supposed to be. And that enables me to actually show them different things within the amplifier when they're buying it. Right. So the fact that that's a mid-range control, well, I've changed the circuit, so it's not going to work in the way that they believe it to work anyway. Right. So
they've got to work harder.
Yeah, they've got to trust their own ear.
Right.
When they set the amplifier up.
Rather than what it says on the front.
Yes.
Yeah.
It just makes the game easy.
Another thing I wanted to ask you about, I noticed on your website you've got an amp, a Caroline, and it's a Caroline 20 watt.
Yes.
Yeah, the 20 watt, that in today's sort of terminology of amplifiers, that's a very low wattage compared to what we see in the amplifier rack behind us. We've got thousands and thousands of watts. But your amplifiers and your speakers equal the level or sound loud in the context they're used. What's the actual significance of wattage in this instance? Is it anything? Is it anything to go by in terms of a sales thing?
Not really in that respect. I think again it's market driven, and a lot of people know that if they have a 100 watt solid state amplifier,
right,
and a 100 watt valve amplifier, they believe that the 100 watt valve amplifier is louder. Well, it isn't. It just has a more sensitive speaker than the solid state amplifier.
Right. And that gives it the extra boost.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. It is just a marketing tool that people maybe have blindly followed.
Right. So it's nothing for a guitarist to really get worried about.
No. If you take the solid state amplifier and you give it some really high sensitivity speakers, it will be as loud as the valve amplifier.
Okay. Right, with that in mind then, we'll go back over to our band and we'll hear some volume. This time they're going to be playing Born Under a Bad Sign. Right then, I think it'd be a good idea now if you told us a little bit about the amplifiers we're listening to. So if you can tell us about the models, about what they are and what's special about them, that'd be great.
Tell you what, we'll start with the green one.
Okay.
The green one, big hero of mine, Charlie Wen.
Okay.
Charlie Wen Watkins, who designed an amplifier called the Dominator that Jim Marshall robbed, called it the Blues Breaker. And this is the one that a lot of the American boutique amp builders are now copying. EL84 is in the power section, and an ECC83 in the preamp section. Very classic.
Okay.
But I've added an EF86 channel, and it's switchable, so you have 2 channels.
Okay.
You have a very, going back to the hi-fi, EF86 was traditionally an audio valve, used a lot in radio. And the ECC83 is something that come slightly later into the 60s. And it was the higher gain. All the valve makers and all the amplifier companies wanted slightly higher gain from a valve, and they thought this was the new wonder valve. So everybody went off and designed their audio with this new wonder valve. Slightly sharper in the mids, whereas the EF86 has a slightly flatter response. So it was my belief that I would cover more ground and I could build something that had a lot of distortion, but then it could be reined back and you could have a really nice jazz tone.
Right.
So it was kind of all encompassing. And it was at the time that I was doing the guitar shows and trying to sell the pedals, so I had 2 amplifiers in one, was my thinking. And then I met a gent called Roland Lumby, who said, no, what you want to do there, son, is you want to do this and you want to do that, and we'll do this.
Right.
Not saying too much about it, but you can cascade one channel onto the next, which gives you even more distortion.
All right.
And there are more nuances within the amplifier than what first appears. I'm not too sure what else to say about it.
Okay,
really.
what about the other amp?
This is a complete, not a custom number that I allowed the guitarist in to sort of say, what is it you really, really want? And within building what he really wanted, realised that actually maybe there was a couple of tones that weren't included. Right. So we devised a way of being able to switch the phase inverter, which opened up different aspects and included different. There's a very cut and dry American and British sound within valve amplifiers, guitar valve amplifiers. And you are able to change the phase inverter to a very American sound and phase inverter.
Right.
Or a very British sound and phase inverter.
So you got British and American in the one box?
In the one box. And we also done some trickery with the preamp so that you could cut out parts of the preamp, but not the entirety of it, which adds more or less mid-range depending on how you set the thing.
Right, right.
Without going too far into its technical
What about
aspects.
the speakers? Are the speakers important?
Oh, most definitely, yeah. But I think that's a very personal thing with the guitarist.
Right.
I almost see an amplifier as being an instrument.
Okay.
And the speaker that lends itself to the amplifier in what I believe would lend itself to the amplifier is not what the guitarist may feel lends it. So it's a very personal choice. But I give the guitarist that choice when they come to the workshop.
So you have different speakers for them to try?
Definitely, yes.
And is it down to the chassis and the speakers, the drivers and the speaker that make the sound?
It's every aspect.
Yeah.
It's every aspect, whether the cabinet be open or closed. Some people like more projection, some people like less.
Right.
Some people want a louder sound. And in that I mean the actual sensitivity of the speaker, so they want the thing to really bark, whereas other players, they like to sort of be slightly knocked back on the stage.
And again, that's the boutique nature of what you're making. You're making it a very personal service for someone who wants basically no compromise with quality and sound.
I really want to build what people want, as opposed to what I want to sell.
Okay. Well, in fairness to the other two members of the band, we can't ignore the bass player. And Andy's playing a bare-faced cabinet with an Ampeg head, is that true? And Steff said to make sure to tell everybody that he's got a pair of wooden things and he hits things with them. So there you go. So that's the rest of the band covered. If you were to buy or want to buy another, or if what amplifier if any in the world you could buy or be involved with, what would be your favourite valve amplifier apart from your own? I say apart from your own because I heard an interview once with Paul Weller's father, and Paul Weller's father was asked who his favourite band were, and he said it's the Jam, the Style Council, and the Paul Weller band. So you're not going to be allowed to do that. You can't say your own. So.
Well, bass players, SVTs, they are engineered appallingly in my eyes, but for the sound, SVT, Ampeg. Early Ampeg, I mentioned Charlie Watkins. I would have loved to have been involved in the whole Dominator. Ken Fisher was another personal hero. Dick Denny from Vox. The early days of Vox, I would have really loved to get involved in, you know, that sort of British side of things. Hiwatt, Mr. Reeves.
You've not mentioned Marshall yet. Is Marshall fit in there anywhere?
Not really.
No?
No.
Not a Marshall fan?
No.
No.
No, blonde era Fender.
Okay.
Yeah, when they went to Riviera, Paul Riviera, no. But that blonde era...
What about Mesa Boogie?
No.
No, not a Mesa Boogie fan?
No. Not at all.
While we're talking about personal taste, then, you're surrounded by music. You're involved with music in a big way. All of these bands that come to you wanting you to design things for them. Where's your favourite area of music lie? What type of music do you listen to?
It depends what time of day it is.
Right. So when you're, you know, early evenings, you've got back from the workshop. What would you put on?
I listen to a lot of Led Zeppelin, a lot of Hendrix, but then I listen to a lot of ska, reggae. I like modern dance music. It really depends on the mood that I'm in. I mean, at the minute I'm playing Coltrane, Monk. Who have I listened to today? Mark Bolan. What a Tone, Van Power, early days of Van Power. Yeah. There's an amplifier you don't see anymore, you know. What were we listening to in the car? We listened to some drum and bass in the car when we were coming over.
Right.
I am so eclectic.
Yeah, so it's not just the classic guitar stuff you listen to.
Oh, no.
No, you listen to anything. The music you listen to, do you think it affects your philosophy about your designs? Do you think you're influenced, you know, from the side of listening to music to wanting to create it in that way?
It's more as a player that influences, or did influence, until I realised that there's a bigger audience.
Right.
And that being very staid and wanting to build things that only I like is a bit...
Right.
It's the wrong direction.
Okay.
You know, you have to give people creative tools.
Right.
To go and create something. You know, there's nothing more fulfilling than someone coming and saying, I found a sound. That, you know, a friend of mine the other day, we were trying an amplifier and he said, it sounds like a horn section.
Right.
It's got that...
A mid-range rasp.
Yes.
Yeah.
And to me, that's where it sits.
Yeah.
It's that newness, it's that it's the modernity of the thing that really interests me.
Do you try and get to see your creations in action? Do you go to many gigs?
Yes, all the time.
So you go and regularly listen to people, and
yeah.
Do you ever get the urge to go on the stage and tweak things?
No. There's normally barely big security guards stopping you getting on the stage.
You're the guy who owns the company. You're the inventor. You should be allowed to do that. No. I've got another question now, and I'm going to ask this on behalf of one of my students who I was talking to just earlier, actually. And I'm not going to turn around because he's in the audience and he'll probably get embarrassed. But I was talking to him about valve amplifiers, and I said, what amplifier do you like? And he said, well, actually, I like the digital emulations now. I like digital emulations of amplifiers rather than, I don't have to carry a great big amplifier head anymore. I can turn up with, a little digital device that does the same thing.
Yes.
And I said I'd ask you this question totally out of interest
Yes.
to see how you'd feel about that. What's your feel on that?
I definitely think it has its place.
Okay.
It has its place. And when they put a feel into the technology that you can get from a valve amp.
Right.
I think that's when people like myself maybe will be looking in different directions and different career paths.
I know you mentioned this feel of the signal path and the instrument. When we're talking about how we describe things, people often say the valves sound warm. That warm descriptor is what they use, which we frown upon sometimes when people are writing essays for us and they say something sounds warm because one person's warm. How do you actually describe what that is?
The way I would describe it is not the way a traditional guitarist would describe it. They would say you can almost feel the string.
Okay.
That when you hit a note, I think David Gilmour said it best, that when he's got his high watts and he hits that chord and he feels the power and he can almost sit on it. He can almost put his back on it, lean his back on it. It's that solid. It's that there's that much air that's moving. That's what I don't see in digital equipment.
Right.
Yeah, it's the human touch almost that you get from valves that you just...
It's organic, maybe.
It is the right word, definitely,
yeah.
that you don't see within solid-state equipment. There is one more thing, but we've done some experiments into it. And there is a way to move air with solid-state equipment in the same way that a valve amp would actually move air.
Right.
But that's one for the future.
That's for the future. And that comes to my final question, actually. Where next for DWJ? Where do you think your amplifiers are going to go? Without giving any trade secrets away. Do you think, here's another, I'll rephrase that a little bit. Do you think you've reached the peak of what you can achieve with valves yet?
No, I don't think you ever will.
No?
I don't think, as music moves, the amplifiers must move with it. Every generation wants something slightly different.
And I suppose with the boutique nature of what you do, you can make that change happen quicker.
Yes, faster to react.
Yeah.
I made a definite decision to try and stay small and very niche.
So you're never going to farm out circuits to China and, assembly in Malaysia or wherever
Hopefully
to cut
not.
costs?
Because then it wouldn't be one of my amplifiers.
Right.
I don't see how... or I can't foresee how they would be able to actually build what I do.
Okay, so boutique forever, and
Hopefully.
the small little workshop up in Liverpool's not going to be vastly expanded too soon.
No.
Good. Well, that's good to hear. Keep with your strengths. Right, we're going to finish the interview now. Well, thanks for coming along to Glyndwr TV today. It's been really nice having you, and I'm sure a lot of the students and a lot of the people in the audience have been enlightened with your philosophy of uncompromising audio quality and build quality. But we're going to finish off with our band again now. And before we do, one more time, we've got Andy Whitfield on bass, Steve Kenyon on lead guitar 1. Kenyon-Owens, sorry. And we've got Steve Nicholls on lead guitar 2. And we've got Steff Owens on drums. So take it away, guys. Thanks for coming along. See you all again. you.